summer of 2014, my family rented a cabin on the McKenzie River in Oregon for a 4-day weekend. There was a main 2-bedroom, 2-bath cabin with a kitchen, then a smaller secondary cabin next to it. I stayed in the main cabin with my parents, and my brother Jim was in the smaller one with his wife and their 2 kids. The entire property was gorgeous, and it was right on the water. The weekend started out great because it was hot and we were in the water a lot. My mom was also cooking the meals, and we were mostly spending time together in chairs by the river. The main cabin had the only kitchen, so that's where we all congregated during the day, and it was just a fun family vacation. Nothing happened until the second night we were there, and on that night, I was in the main cabin getting ready for bed around 10 p.m. My parents had already gone into their room, and I was in a smaller bedroom next to the kitchen. While I was in there, I got this really uncomfortable feeling like I was being watched. I don't know how else to explain it other than I just had this strong sense that I wasn't alone. I'm sure most people can relate to that. This feeling wasn't overwhelming or anything, and I mostly ignored it, then got into bed, shut the light off, and laid there listening to the river with the window wide open. The moon was also pretty bright that night, so there was a little bit of light coming into the room. I was facing the window and the river when I first got into bed, but eventually I rolled over so I was facing the other side of the room, and on that side there was a small closet. It had 2 doors that opened outward, and each door had those wooden slats running all the way down so you could kind of see through the cracks. For some reason, I started to intensely focus on this closet. I could see the darkness inside through the slats, and that feeling of not being alone came creeping back in even stronger. It was like I couldn't stop looking at them, and I remember thinking I was just freaking myself out. Then up near the top of the closet, I swear I actually saw something move inside. Seeing it made me sit straight up in bed and scoot way back away from the closet and toward the window. I was trying to stay rational, and the first thing that came into my head was that a mouse or other rodent had gotten into the cabin, especially since people had been coming in and out all day. Thinking back on it, I have no idea why I didn't just get up and tell my dad, but at the time I thought if I just opened the closet door, it would run out into the living room. Then I leaned out from the bed without actually putting my feet on the ground, grabbed the handle on the closet door and swung it all the way open. The second that door opened, I just about had a heart attack because sitting up on the little upper shelf inside was an owl. It was just perched there completely alive and moving its head. I screamed so loudly it probably woke people up in other cabins down the river. I jumped out of bed and ran straight into my parents' room, yelling to my dad that there was an owl stuck in my room. At that point, this whole thing turned into a huge deal. All the lights came on, my parents got up, and my brother even came over because he had heard me scream. Then we huddled in the living room and tried to figure out what to do about it. My dad went into the bedroom first and confirmed it was still in the closet. Then he and my brother opened both outside doors and went in with a broom and a blanket to try and catch it or make it fly out on its own. For about 10 minutes, my mom and I stood in the kitchen waiting for this thing to fly out of the bedroom. It finally did, but immediately went into frantic circles around the living room before finally finding its way out the sliding glass doors. It was honestly one of the most insane situations you can imagine. It reminded me of the bat scene in the movie Black Sheep when Chris Farley and David Spade tried to get a bat out of their cabin. Ours wasn't quite that hilarious, but it felt just as chaotic. After it flew outside, we shut all the doors and were uncontrollably laughing because it was just so ridiculous. My mom actually felt really bad for the owl and kept saying the poor thing had probably been stuck in there for days. It was really something that none of us could ever forget. After that crazy night, everything calmed back down and the rest of the trip was totally normal. We were all joking about it for days, but I noticed a small detail that wasn't really funny to me. When the commotion was over and we had gotten the owl out of the house, it was almost 4 o'clock in the morning. In the moment, I wasn't thinking about that at all, but later on I realized I had found the owl shortly after going to bed, so that would have been around 10:30 at night. I couldn't understand where that many hours had gone unless I had unknowingly fallen asleep, but I'm almost positive that didn't happen. After the vacation was over and I was back at home, it didn't feel like anything more than a fun family trip with a funny story in the middle. But then I had 2 unbelievably vivid dreams, or more accurately, visions about the cabin, and they happened right in a row. The first one was at night and right when I was going to bed. I do not feel like this was a dream, but I'll call it that to make it easy. In this dream, I was back in the bedroom of the cabin and standing at the window looking out at the river. Slightly downstream from us, it looked like there were fireworks going off. I could hear these loud, muffled pops echoing through the woods, and there were wildly colorful lights reflecting on the river. I never actually saw any fireworks in the sky because there were tall trees around the cabin, but these colorful flashes were stunning and they came from somewhere above the river. Each time I saw one, it was followed by a popping sound, and I think that's why I felt like it was fireworks. This dream was very weird, but also peaceful and beautiful at the same time. The very next day, I had another dream about the cabin, but this one happened after I had eaten dinner and was watching Orange is the New Black on my couch. I think this had to be some kind of waking vision because I wasn't even tired. It just happened while I was sitting there with my feet on the coffee table. In this one, I was back in the bed at the cabin, lying on my side and facing the closet, exactly like I had been when we'd actually found the owl. I was staring at the upper slats of the closet door where it was completely black inside, but I had this intense feeling of anxiety and fear. It also felt like I was completely alone out there, like none of my family was at the cabin anymore and it was just me. It was a very helpless and lonely feeling. As I kept staring through these slats, I almost knew something was going to happen. Then I saw the owl's eyes slowly move out of the darkness until they were right up against the slats and staring directly at me. I could even see moonlight reflecting on the eyeballs, and when we made direct eye contact, it pulled back into the closet. This was so deeply terrifying that it violently snapped me back into reality. It was really worse than a nightmare because I knew I hadn't actually been sleeping. It's really hard to explain. After that horrible vision, I couldn't help but start to analyze the whole owl situation, and the more I thought about it, the stranger it all seemed. The cabins we rented were extremely nice and couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 years old at the time. It's not like these were old vintage cabins where animals were getting in. It also had been professionally cleaned before we got there, so I feel like whoever did the cleaning would have checked the bedroom closet. And lastly, the day we got there when I was putting my things in the bedroom, I could swear I opened both closet doors just to look inside, and I don't remember seeing anything in there. I guess it's possible the owl was sitting on that upper shelf and I somehow missed it, but it seems like it would have made a sound or moved or something. It had me really confused and it always felt like I was missing something. Fast forward all the way to 2020, 6 years after that vacation, and I was doing a lot of binge watching from comedy shows to documentaries and whatever else. I think a lot of us were doing the same thing that year. During that time, I somehow came across a movie called The Fourth Kind from 2009, and I learned that owl sightings can sometimes be connected to close encounters, like alien close encounters. I had never heard anything like that before watching the movie, but apparently it's not uncommon. That made me do a little more digging to figure out the species of owl we saw in the cabin, and I found out without a doubt it was a barn owl because of the unmistakable heart-shaped face and black eyes. Barn owls are common in Oregon, but from what I read, they stay in the valley and live in more open field-like areas for hunting reasons. Our cabin was halfway up McKenzie Pass in the Cascade Range, and in no way was it open. It was heavily forested up there. I can't say what happened for sure, but I find it very strange the owl was in our cabin at all. I also wonder why I had 2 visions about being back there, where the first one was about that light show in the sky, and the second one was the owl staring at me through the slats in the closet. And finally, there's the time discrepancy. I experienced about an hour going by when in reality it was 5, and that makes me think other things happened in those 4 hours that I'm not aware of. My name is Ed. I'm 56 years old, and 10 years ago I had multiple sightings in Corning and Rochester, New York. I've shared this with quite a few people over the years, and reactions have been mixed. Some people find it very interesting, but others have found it to be a little too far-fetched for them to believe. I don't want to say my exact address, but the first incident happened right near my house on Powder House Road, just a few minutes outside of Corning. My kids were still teenagers and living with us, and one night I had gone into town to pick up pizza from our favorite place, Anilo's. On my way home, and this was on Powder House, I saw something ahead of me in the sky that was unlike anything I'd seen before. It was similar to how 3 planes might look if they were flying right next to each other and each one had a spotlight on the front. What made it interesting though was that the lights were locked together like they were one piece, and it wasn't moving or changing altitude, it was just sitting there. Then the lights started blinking in a very odd pattern that wasn't anything like what you'd see on a plane. This really caught my attention because it was so bright. I ended up pulling over on part of the road where the trees thin out so I could see it without anything in the way. I never got out of the car, but I had a perfect view through the windshield, and all 3 lights were repeating this same pattern in unison. They would quickly blink once and take a short pause. Then they would do a long blink where the lights stayed on for a second, and that was followed by 2 more quick blinks right in a row. After that, they would stay off for about 3 seconds before starting the pattern over again. It was short blink and pause, then long blink and 2 more short blinks. This happened over and over again, and I watched it for a minute, but eventually realized I needed to get the food home, so I started driving again, but still kept my eyes on it the whole time. The pattern kept going until I got right near my driveway, and that's where it stopped. I don't know if this thing flew away or if I just couldn't see it anymore, but that was my first encounter with it. The second time was only days after the first one. It was about 10 p.m. and I was in our backyard walking across the lawn from our shed to the house. I saw something flashing out of the corner of my eye that made me look up, and it was the same 3 lights. Exactly like the first time, they were very close together and blinking that same pattern. This was all in plain sight over our neighborhood, and I watched it for well over a minute that time. I couldn't see any kind of actual aircraft behind the lights, and I was really trying to figure out what it was. It also made no movements in any direction. It stayed in that one spot the whole time. It eventually did a final pattern of flashes, then the lights didn't come back on. I never saw anything fly away, and at no point did I hear an engine. I couldn't tell what it was or where it had gone. That sighting and the first one were both directly above where we live in Corning, but the third time I saw this thing, it was nowhere near our house. We were about an hour and a half away visiting my parents in Rochester. On one of the nights I was with my dad on their back deck, and it showed up again out of nowhere. It was identical to what I had seen over our house, and luckily my dad and I both saw it clearly. I had a hard time accepting what was in front of me because without question they were the same 3 lights. They were low in the sky, very close to my parents' house, and flashing the exact same pattern. I hadn't told anyone about my 2 previous experiences, but it was so strange I had to tell my dad while we were watching it that I had seen this 2 other times back at home. We stood on the deck for at least a couple of minutes, and I was even counting out the pattern with him. He kept calling it a helicopter, then he'd take it back and say he didn't know what it was. In between one of the flashing patterns, the lights just didn't come back on, and again, no aircraft of any kind was in the sky afterward. I was so glad my dad was there to see it because something was going on. He was still on the fence about what it was at that point, but he also knew there was no engine sound and admitted it wasn't like anything he'd ever seen. All 3 of these sightings happened in the span of a few weeks, and as unusual as they were, I probably would have gone on without making a big deal about it. But then I got a call from my dad that put a whole new spin on things. Shortly after that 3rd sighting up at my parents' house, he called me, and when I answered the phone, he went straight into talking about what we saw. He said he had found something that was either the biggest coincidence ever, or it was confirmation that what we had seen was something far more unexplainable. It definitely got my attention, and when I asked what he was talking about, he told me that ever since we had seen the lights from his back deck, he hadn't stopped thinking about it. I didn't know it at the time, but it really affected him. He had been obsessing over this flashing pattern and actually wrote it out on paper. Then after brainstorming for 2 days, he had an idea and he pulled up a Morse code alphabet online. I remember being really curious where this was going, and when he told me what he had found, I thought it was funny at first because it sounded so impossible. He said that if you take that pattern and decipher it into Morse code, it actually spelled something out. The quick single flash would be a dot, which is the letter E. Then after the pause, the long flash followed by 2 more quick flashes would be a dash and 2 dots, and that letter is D. That means that if you use the Morse code alphabet, the pattern I kept seeing was E and D, literally my name. I can't say I wasn't speechless, but I was also laughing about it at the same time. It was kind of unbelievable. The chances of seeing this thing in the sky 3 separate times in just a few weeks and in 2 different locations was crazy enough. Then I find out the pattern it was flashing matched the Morse code letters for my name? How is that even possible? It really makes no sense for anything to be using Morse code anymore, especially if it were something extraterrestrial. The time my dad and I saw it was the last time I've seen anything, and that was 10 years ago. I'm still in the same house and I definitely still look around if I'm outside at night, but so far it hasn't come back. I don't want to come out and say I'm sure the pattern was spelling my name, but I will say it's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. My dad, on the other hand, is convinced it was Morse code and something was trying to contact me. He is a true believer since he saw it with his own eyes, and he thinks I had a real alien encounter. I don't know if I believe that or not, but it's a cool thing to think about, and I have become much more interested in the subject. If it had just been the one time in one location, I probably wouldn't have ever thought about it again, but because it was the exact same thing 3 different times, I can't help but think somehow it could have been for me. I got home from work one night around 11 p.m. Back then, my house had a long path from the back door out to the road, and I had to get off my motorbike to get through the narrow gate we had. When I got past the gate, I took my helmet off and just happened to move my head around to loosen my neck muscles. As soon as my head went back, I saw a small patch of completely empty sky surrounded by 4 strikingly vivid stars, or at least what I took to be stars initially. It looked like there was a dark black hole in the sky with lights around the edges, and I had never seen anything that looked like that. I should also mention that this was almost 40 years ago and I was a young man working my first job after university. It was a cloudless night and light pollution was almost zero back then, and there was nothing I knew of that could create what I was seeing. I stood there holding my bike and totally silent watching this phenomenon. Then shockingly, these 4 stars on the perimeter started to rotate around this empty center. It was very slow but absolutely noticeable. Because of the way my father raised me, I was determined to stay hyper-skeptical and scientific about it, but I could not explain what it was. I had seen books about UFOs and actually knew someone in school who claimed to have seen one, but I thought of myself as an educated adult then, and I felt positive I could figure it out. This moving shape appeared to be roughly over our neighborhood, though I had no reference point to know for sure, so it could have been miles away in reality. Visually, it looked about the size of a baseball if you were holding one at arm's length. I watched it spin in the same spot for several minutes as I was running through various explanations in my head. The part that was throwing me off was the rotation of the outer lights. I could pretty easily imagine something dark like a balloon floating in the center that could possibly block out the stars, but I couldn't figure out what would have lights rotating around it. I considered an airship, but the only one I had ever heard of back then was the Goodyear blimp, which I think was called Europa on our side of the pond. Even airships have engines that produce noise though, and in my quiet suburb I should have heard something, but it was dead quiet. A little more time passed, then something off the wall happened. The empty black section that had been in the center started to move independently away from the lights. It didn't happen fast, so I could see it obstructing the stars as it progressed across the sky. Then it got to about the midway point between horizons, or basically overhead, and all of a sudden it was gone. It could have kept going or been too difficult to see with the naked eye, or it could have just disappeared. Either way, I completely lost sight of it. It's weird to say I could even see something moving that was almost invisible, but if you could have seen it, you'd understand. It was visible in the sense that it was pure black against the stars, and that's what made it stand out. It really and truly looked like a hole in the sky. After that happened, my attention went back to the 4 lights, which hadn't gone anywhere but were still rotating. Straight away, I noticed the stars were in between them, which I hadn't been able to see when the dark object was there. This was really an astonishing sight because of how different it was from anything else I'd ever seen. Only seconds after the dark center part had disappeared, the 4 lights broke apart like little individual satellites flying off in opposite directions. 2 of them went beyond the hill my house sat on and past my visual range, but the other 2 went incredibly far, making it all the way to the opposite horizon. None of them hit a speed that defies physics, but they were moving quickly, maybe about half the speed of a meteor coming through the atmosphere. In my opinion, this ruled out any airship or balloon, and I still hadn't heard a sound, so anything with a combustion engine was out too. I was at a total loss for what I had just witnessed, and in that moment, I surprisingly found myself accepting the fact that it could have been something alien. As smart as I thought I was back then, I wasn't ready for that. After the 4 lights were gone, it took another 30 minutes for me to pull myself away from staring at the stars. I finally got my bike home and went inside, but I spent that night wide awake and replaying what happened. I ended up scribbling down dozens of imaginary crafts and shapes on paper to visualize what it might have looked like. I really wish I could have seen it in broad daylight. One of the biggest questions that I still have is how many things did I see? I don't know if it was 1 or 2 larger things or even 5 separate smaller things, and I would love to know the answer to that. I spent many years keeping this experience to myself for fear of ridicule. Even when I wanted to talk about it, I would fabricate people's reactions in my head, and that was enough for me to stay quiet. It was only when I got older and didn't care what people thought anymore that I started to open up about it. I have never stopped wondering what I saw. It's not something that's dominated my life in any way, but it has been the biggest mystery, and my normally rational brain craves an explanation. The phrase, "I remember it as though it was yesterday," really holds true here because I can still picture it in my mind as clearly today as I could when it happened. It makes me wish that everyone could be lucky enough to see something unexplainable like I did. I really believe it changes you as a human being. You go from seeing the world in a very small and limited way to a much larger and more open way. At least that's what it did to me, and I have never been able to look at the night sky the same. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.